What if I told you that for a decade in the 1920s, a small group of Native Americans in the middle of America became the wealthiest people per capita on Earth, only to have their fortunes become a death sentence, orchestrated by the very people sworn to protect them? This isn't fiction. This is the chilling, meticulous, and almost unbelievable true story of the Osage Reign of Terror. The setting was northeast Oklahoma, a patch of land deemed virtually worthless by white settlers until the late 19th century. But beneath the scrub oak and limestone of the Osage Nation Reservation lay a secret of unimaginable value: crude oil, thick, black, and abundant. Through shrewd negotiation decades earlier, the Osage people had retained the mineral rights to their land, a legal feat that would ultimately bring them unparalleled, catastrophic wealth. By the 1920s, Osage County was a spectacle. Their wealth, derived from leasing the mineral rights to burgeoning oil companies, was so vast that members of the tribe often traveled with armed bodyguards, drove new Rolls-Royces, and employed white servants. They possessed head rights, a share of the tribe's royalty income that was legally inheritable. A single head right could yield thousands of dollars a month, a fortune in an era when a factory worker earned mere cents per hour. The Osage held the keys to a liquid gold mine, and the American business and political machine smelled the opportunity. The system of control and the fatal flaw. The federal government, in a move they legally framed as protection, established a system that would prove to be their greatest oversight, or perhaps their greatest enabling factor. Because the Osage were deemed incompetent to manage their vast, sudden wealth, a system of guardianship was imposed. White lawyers, bankers, and local officials were appointed as guardians, controlling the finances of the Osage individuals who held the head rights. In practice, these guardians often treated the Osage fortunes as their own personal piggy banks, skinning millions through exorbitant fees, questionable investments, and outright theft, while the Osage themselves lived under restrictive allowances. However, the most sinister element of the system was the law concerning the head rights themselves. If an Osage person died, their head right did not automatically pass to their full-blood Osage relatives. Instead, it could be willed away, and if no will existed, it often defaulted to the next of kin, who, in many chilling cases, were not Osage at all, but the white spouses, guardians, or business associates who had married into the families precisely for this purpose. The plot began to unfold with chilling precision. It wasn't a spontaneous outburst of violence. It was a slow, methodical campaign of calculated murder, often referred to by locals as the Osage Murders or the Reign of Terror. The unraveling threads of death. The first prominent shocking death arrived in 1921. Anna Brown, a young Osage woman of considerable wealth, was found dead in a shallow ravine, a bullet wound to the back of her head. The local coroner ruled it a death from an unknown assailant, perhaps an accident or a robbery gone wrong. The investigation was cursory, the Osage community deeply unsettled, and then, a few months later, her mother, Lizzie Q. Kyle, died. Her death was officially attributed to a sudden, wasting illness, though many whispered it was poison. The true scale of the conspiracy became apparent when Anna Brown's sister, Rita Smith, and her wealthy white husband, Bill Smith, were killed in their local mansion, not by an outside thief, but by a massive explosion that tore the house apart. An inquest found evidence of dynamite. The message was clear: wealth brought death. These were not isolated incidents. One by one, Osage individuals holding valuable head rights began to die under suspicious circumstances: shootings, poisonings, inexplicable illnesses, and violent accidents.
The death toll climbed over the next several years. Some historians estimate 20 suspicious deaths. Others suggest closer to 100, factoring in uninvestigated cases. The pattern was undeniable. Wealthy Osage were being systematically eliminated so their head rights could pass to their white connections, often facilitated by the very guardians meant to protect them. The local law enforcement, riddled with corruption, indifference, or outright complicity in the conspiracy, was useless. The Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation was overwhelmed or compromised. The sheer scale and cold-blooded planning of the murders demanded an authority the state could not provide. It was here, at the nadir of the Osage crisis, that a relatively new, nascent federal agency stepped in, the Bureau of Investigation, the precursor to the FBI. Headed by the young, ambitious J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau was desperate to establish its credibility and national reach. Hoover assigned the case to an agent unlike any the Bureau had seen, Tom White. Agent White was a former Texas Ranger, a man who understood the brutal codes of the frontier and the necessary ruthlessness required to fight organized crime. He arrived in Osage County, a quiet, imposing figure, surrounded by a small, hand-picked team of undercover agents, men who would have to shed their identities and become ghosts in the community to uncover a conspiracy woven into the very fabric of local society. They couldn't trust the sheriff, the local doctor, or even the town banker. The investigation became a masterclass in early 20th century espionage. Agents posed as cattlemen, insurance salesmen, and Bible salesmen. They mapped out the family trees of the victims, tracing the inheritance paths like a macabre blueprint. They were met with silence, threats, and outright hostility. White's team began to realize the conspiracy reached higher and wider than they could have imagined, implicating prominent doctors, lawyers, and even former members of the U.S. Congress. The breakthrough ultimately centered on one man, the web's apparent weaver, William Hale, a rich cattle baron known as the King of the Osage Hills. Hale projected an image of a benevolent local patriarch, a friend to the Osage. Yet, beneath the veneer of respectability, Hale was the architect of the murders, using his nephew, Ernest Burkhardt, who had married Osage Molly Kyle, a survivor whose entire family had been systematically murdered, as an unknowing or coerced pawn in the scheme to inherit her wealth. Agent White's team meticulously documented the plots, the hiring of hitmen, the staging of fake illnesses, and the forging of wills. The evidence gathered through informants and sheer perseverance led to arrests that shocked the nation. The trial of William Hale was sensational, a pillar of the community exposed as a cold-blooded murderer driven by nothing less than the insatiable American hunger for oil wealth. The story does not end with Hale's conviction, though that was a monumental victory for justice. It ends with the harrowing reality that the trauma left an indelible mark. The survivors, like Molly Burkhardt, who watched her sisters and mother die, were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered existence, their trust in the American system utterly destroyed. The systematic elimination of the Osage people was not just a series of isolated crimes. It was a targeted, economic genocide disguised by a flawed legal structure. This terrifying decade in Oklahoma laid the foundation for federal law enforcement as we know it, forcing the Bureau of Investigation to develop sophisticated techniques for rooting out corruption and organized crime on a national scale. It is a story of unimaginable wealth, unimaginable betrayal, and the relentless courage required to bring the truth into the daylight.